And we're live on YouTube. Welcome everybody to another NPM Open RFC call. Today's date is Wednesday, October 21st. We'll be following along in the agenda that was posted in, I believe it was issue number 263. And I'll spam chat as usual with the HackMD doc. Feel free to add yourselves to the attendees list. Roy, are you going to be able to help with notes, or I can
Sure.
as well? Okay.
No, I can take care of it.
Okay, appreciate it. So just a quick acknowledgement of these calls and all communication that is sort of discussed, and issues and RFCs themselves are under a code of conduct. Please be mindful, and as people are speaking, raise your hand if you'd like to add something. The outline of and the desired outcomes of these discussions is hopefully to move RFCs forward and to interact with the community and move together as one. So we have a small agenda. Apologize for it just getting generated sort of last minute here again today. Is there any announcements before we dig in though? Other than we've shipped another patch, or we shipped 2 or 3 patches since last week when we shipped NPM 7. So as of yesterday, I believe 703 is available for you to get. If you want to get it, it's in the usual ways: npm install -g npm at 7. And we have some changelog notes in a blog post we posted yesterday. Appreciate Roy and Isaac jumping on and getting that done. We're continuing to improve docs and patch up the things we're finding from the feedback that we're getting from people that are using it. So it's great, and appreciate everybody filing bugs and giving us feedback. Any other announcements that folks want to add? Node 15 also went out yesterday, Jordan. That's good. 1501 is landing today, if it hasn't already been queued up by Beth. And that should include, I believe, the 702 release. So it will already have the couple patches as far as I know.
Yeah, it should include the 7.0.3, I think. Okay,
that's great. Awesome. And I know, Jordan, we've had a couple comments back and forth even just before the call about some workflow stuff there. So we can discuss that offline for sure. So digging into the first item, if there's no other announcements, issue 235. So Mark, I appreciate you jumping on here. And maybe you can just give us a quick update of the status of the allowing server generate header values RFC that I know you've been working on.
Sure, yeah. To be honest, it's been a while since we've actually raised this one. I think for the last discussion, this was added, I added this RFC off the back of the existing one. And I think we came to the conclusion last of all that there wasn't really an actual decent use case to warrant moving this RFC forward. But I think at the time, I don't think Isaac's was on the call. Isaac was on the call, so whether he had any input on this or not. But yeah, I think the idea was we were just going to leave the PR open to see if anybody else had ideas in the future rather than just closing it outright.
Yeah, I think we quickly discussed this a bit as well in terms of the parsing. I think Isaac, you noted something around the actual parsing of the header object, how we could style that in the command line.
I think that's related to the RFC, the other RFC.
Yeah. So I mean, this is kind of a follow-on. So it feels a little bit premature to dig too deep into it, or sort of get too hung up on the finer points of how things get expressed or how things get saved in the config file or whatever. The main idea here is, though, assuming, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, assuming we have some way of specifying arbitrary headers in your project npm-rc file, should we have some way for the server, for the registry, to say, here is a header you should send back to me next time? And then the CLI would save it in whatever method it uses to specify arbitrary headers. I think it's a good idea, and it's kind of like, once we have the first one, then the second one's relatively straightforward. But yeah, it does. The only use case that I can see for it is a server-generated app ID, which I think is very valuable. The other kind of classic case, which maybe we could just be an entire alternative to this whole idea, is a cookie jar, right? That's kind of the classic case of a server says, here's a goober you should send back to me, right? And then the browser sends that goober back to the server every time it makes a request. And so it feels like we might be sort of reinventing cookies to some extent, in which case we may want to just say, why don't we just use cookies?
Have we asked that question yet? I feel like until you said it right now, it didn't really register to me. But now that you say it, that actually sounds like a really viable option.
Yeah, I think I mentioned it last time, right? We could have set.
And while Isaac was saying that, I actually just posted a comment on that RFC. It is like cookies, and that actually raises all the privacy concerns that cookies do, and GDPR concerns, and so on and so forth. So that may be something that warrants more discussion.
Also. Yeah, I mean, on the other hand, so the advantage of doing it using cookies is that we can kind of piggyback on all of that prior work, right? We can say look, as much as there are privacy concerns and GDPR concerns, there's also GDPR, which has very, specific guidelines on how you're supposed to handle that stuff. And, proxies all kind of have some way of handling cookies and so on and so forth. There's kind of clearly paved semantics, although we could probably design something more elegant. We are sort of starting from square one, and just sort of aping what web browsers do might be a little bit more, I don't know, safe or predictable or what have you.
So in terms of the, just to follow up on that, and can we either close, or do we want to keep open, I guess, for now, and remove the agenda label for the allow server generated header values, which is the follow-up and was originally ordered before this? Yeah.
I think just remove the agenda and leave it open, and maybe make a note that until we, basically two options. One is do we just implement cookies in a cookie jar? And two, it really needs to, if it's not just implementing cookies, then it kind of needs to follow up on 138. Right? Yeah, 138. So should we talk about 138 then?
Yeah. So that's I've now reordered it. So 138.
Cool.
That was sort of mine as well, obviously, so I can do a refresh on that. So the original idea was that we were trying to put application IDs into the package JSON files. Somewhere through this discussion, it was realized it would be a better place to put it into either a local npm RC or even the global npm RC. That's the way the RFC has now been written, but it just so happened a couple of weeks ago I just started to actually look at how easy it would be to actually implement this, given that I think the last we discussed it was kind of almost going to be a move this RFC forward. And it turns out it's kind of already does it in the existing npm client. Slightly hacky in that what goes across on the headers on the wire is not quite as we would want, so it's not very pretty, but nevertheless you can specify a headers in the npm RC, and sure enough that that data goes across the wire. So it kind of raises a question as should we just be closing this? Because obviously one concern could be that people are making use of this, which actually we've just started to do. So having another headers might sort of break backwards compatibility that way.
Yeah, so my suggestion that we specify it as an array of strings would actually be not ideal. And that's what I see currently in this RFC. If we wanted it to be backwards compatible with NPM 6, so we're currently like, in NPM 7, we changed some of the ways that we handle configs in order to make it a little bit easier to reason about just when kind of managing our code. And also to prevent these cases where you have a config that's being respected by something deep in the stack, like make fetch happen. And if it gets specified at the NPM level, like even though we don't have any code that's really aware of it, it just gets passed through kind of blindly. So now we have a specified sort of include list of things that we flatten into a plain JavaScript object. And that JavaScript object is what we pass to all of our dependencies. Now we are in NPM 7 simply because we didn't know about it. We don't do that with the headers config. But that doesn't stop you from specifying a headers section in your npm RC file and putting key value pairs in there, and it'll just work. In NPM 6. In NPM 7, it won't. But we could just put that in the config object. Like there's nothing stopping us from doing that, really. The way that it would have to be specified is, or ideally be specified, is not as an array, but as a as actually a key value object, which again is not necessarily ideal. I don't think. I think you can make each of the different header values an array. So there's ways to do that. We could have like multiple values for headers that allow multiple values. So yeah, like I think actually passing arbitrary values in the headers like from your config, we could totally do. And we could do in a way that sort of works by accident in NPM 6, but we have no plans to break it. So it'll just keep on working. I don't know. What do other people think?
The only change we're asking here then is to change from the array style to the key value.
To the, yeah, like a section of key values.
Yep.
How would that, if are using npm 6 and have npm RC file set up in, let's say, the way that currently works with the v6, and then they upgrade to v7, that will then break.
Well, so
the headers from working, wouldn't it?
No, I mean, well, it would just keep working the same way that it currently would in v6. Right now, you would be passing, like if you specify it the way I originally proposed, which I've since come to realize is a bad idea. But if you did specify it that way with headers being an array of strings, you will get a header with a key of 0 and the string of some key value, and then another, your next header will have a key of 1 and some key value. I strongly doubt that anybody's relying on that in NPM 6, because that is I don't know of any HTTP server that looks for an HTTP header of 1, right? Like that's kind of weird.
We have just started, because I noticed it, we have actually just implemented it.
Okay, well.
Because obviously we want to be able to have v6 working and then going forward to v7. So
if you specify it in the other way that I proposed, where you have headers as a brace, square brace section, and then underneath that you have key value, key value, key value, then that should also work the same in v6 and v7. Once we kind of add headers to the list of included config values.
Got you. Okay. You mean you need there's needed to be changes on v6 as well to pick that up?
No.
Okay. Because I thought I did try that way you've suggested. And I don't believe it worked. I can try it again just to be sure.
Okay. I mean, it would have to be after everything that's at the top level, just by the nature of how INI file files work. Yeah, I think it's worth kind of blessing and saying this is how you specify arbitrary headers, and then we can just move it straight on into implemented once we get that patch in.
Yep, I can take a look.
So, and then in terms of the actual guide on how you would set in command line, we would have to update that as well, right? So -- headers equals like,
yeah. So the way to specify it, I don't know how we would best the way to specify in the command line or in the environment variables. I don't know if we have a way to do that for key value objects.
right. So
like we could add one. It's just that's the thing that we have to kind of do some inventing or deciding that we're not going to do that. We'll just say headers are only from the npm-rc file.
would that be the only one that is like that? I think so, right? That's the only config but I mean, unless somebody else is already like putting stuff into their npm-rc file that are in like object. They can't set that config today.
I'm not sure what you mean.
So like if somebody's already doing this today, like they are doing it by just editing the npm-rc file.
Right.
Right. They're not using like npm like config set headers. Like there's no way of doing this.
Yes, there is no way to do this. And what's really weird is that it seems like it drops the first value, which is very bizarre. I think there may be a bug in the INI parser.
In terms of it drops the first value that under an object in INI?
Yeah, it seems to be doing that, or maybe just the config is doing that.
Okay, that's a good
It's an
thing to look into.
Interesting thing. Yeah, I'll paste my little dummy test in the.
Also be why Mark's tests haven't worked.
Maybe.
Okay, cool. So in terms of moving this forward then, or changing this, do we just want to change the way the implementation looks and then potentially queue up work to backlog work to support this?
Yeah, if it's just like a parsing fix in INI, we could even conceivably fix it for v6. Like that's not particularly hard. And it also reduces the likelihood that anybody's depending on this in v6 because, well, it's broken. So I'm not too worried about it.
Okay. So what do we want to do here then? We just wait for Mark if you can update the examples, I guess, and then we can decide to essentially ratify.
Sure. Yeah. In terms of setting it in the config, we're making a statement at the moment that we're not going to be doing that until people ask for it, I guess.
Setting it in the CLI config, you mean?
Yeah, there's no way. Let's just remove that. Yeah.
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 Okay.
Or just mark it as like, follow-up RFC.
Yep.
Once we have, I think it'll be worth digging into once we have some, once we have headers, we now have an object that we're explicitly saying like this is for users to set. And so being able to set it on the environment and the CLI is kind of important, but that's kind of a whole other bike shed. I'd rather not have derail this discussion.
Yep, makes sense.
Might be good for the implementation just to write something like and document that this is not configurable via npm config, so that we know that we need to write that in, because somebody will eventually say like this doesn't work, and it's not a bug, it's a feature. Okay, cool. So if we're good on that, any other discussion we want to have on this? If not, let's move on to issue 225, the RFC for add support to plugin dependencies. I think this got picked up again this week, although I'm not sure if there's any changes since we brought this up before. I know Marcel was able to join us last week, and I think we can potentially remove this. I think this had to do with generators, and I know Wes had a couple questions.
Yeah, but I don't think there's anything that changed from last week when we sort of tackled the context of why it mattered there.
Okay. So are we like okay with this living in user land, like this tooling living in user land, and like we just aren't doing anything? There's like nothing for npm to support or build here.
Yeah, I think the only thing we mentioned that was slightly related was maybe just the rework on having something like an libnpm exec that people could programmatically like consume just for the sake of like projects like Yeoman, like they could integrate directly into it. I think this is the only thing we might want to signal as
we start a different discussion for that then, maybe, or I forget, or
yeah,
that potentially queue that up. Yeah.
One downside, I kind of brought this up somewhat in passing, but I've thought about it a little bit more, and I think it may be a bigger concern than we appreciated last time around. npm exec uses a lot of npm. Like it has to rely on having the entire config infrastructure, reading package JSON, like it's doing a lot of stuff. So like a libnpm exec is going to be not much simpler than just shelling out to npm.
I mean, there's a bunch of reasons why shelling out is less optimal. Not just it's how much code it loads, right? I mean, there's string parsing if you want to pull out the values from whatever it returns, right? There's like error conditions you have to solve, where if you just have like an async function that execs it in the same code, all the config loading, everything in the same process, you just get rid of all of those other things that a consumer has to do, which makes shelling out annoying or oftentimes just broken. Like there are many times where I've used something where it's shelling out, and the fact that it's shelling out means the way that I ran it in CI actually is now broken, right? Whereas if it was just in the same JavaScript process, like you just avoid all of that complexity.
Yeah. It's
the other thing is requiring all of the files can be done like at start time if it's a library, whereas it has to be done at runtime each time when you're shelling out to it. So if you're doing more than one call, or if runtime is more important than start time, then it's very important, I think, to have the JavaScript version.
Yeah, you get the 150 millisecond or so tax on each child process. Okay, yeah.
Also, shelling out has a bunch of other interesting problems with like what happens if your shell changes, or you're doing something which changes parts of your shell. Then now you've got to like manage all of this other check for find the binary path of the npm you think you should be using, and you sure hope it stays there. And especially in long running things like if you have a service that needs to do some of these things, shelling out is really less optimal. Not to pile on, maybe we already have enough reasons, but
well, and also, I mean, this is it's worth considering. This is a library that will specifically be for the purpose of shelling out. So like, if calling a subprocess is a problem, I have really bad news for you about npm exec.
Yeah, it's just shelling out to something just to shell out again can add layers of complexity, right? I mean, there's reasons why I've seen tons of build failures at work where it is like, well, it would have worked had you called it directly, but you called npm, which called yarn, which called lerna, which called npm, and that's what broke it, right? And it's like that many layers is where you start to get hard to debug problems with like lots of extra complexity.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, just it's going to be getting it exactly right as a library is going to be a little bit tricky. That's all. It's not as easy as like libnpm version, where we have a relatively straightforward like task to perform.
Okay, so I've removed this specific issue from the agenda for next week, and there's an action item which I think we had last week too, to I think probably create either a separate RFC for this, or we can just take this as a to-do and that this is backlogged for the team to eventually have a lib npm or lib exec, npm exec. Yeah, I don't think there's anything else to do there.
Yeah, not much more to discuss.
Yeah, I will just ask maybe Wes and Jordan if you want to document some of the reasons I totally couldn't get notes versus why you wouldn't want it to show up. Yeah.
Cool. So moving on to PR 217. So add registry per package per organization. So this is the like scoped, per package per organization config. I noticed, Wes, you gave some feedback last week, and I'm not sure anything's happened since then. There hasn't been any updates to the actual RFC. And was this feedback you had also given in last call? I can't remember.
Sorry, I got distracted for just a second. We are on 217, right?
Yeah, so 217.
Yeah.
The add registry per package per organization, and you gave
a
number of hazard points.
Yeah, we chatted about it last week, and so I think the action item from that was like, hey, just like write up an example of like a scenario where this hazard, just so that we had like a concrete, thing to point to and say like, here, this really can happen. And for what it's worth, I tried to point out, I tried to write one that wasn't a real world example I've seen, just so that, I didn't expose real people to real harm. But there's like probably 20 variants of this sort of workflow that can be opened up by the config not being respected in older NPMs.
Sorry, my mouse is dying here. So, and I can unmute with my keyboard. Okay. Is that all we want to do? Was essentially like identify that there is, or like outline there is a hazard, but we still probably want to move forward with like supporting this?
I think the concern is that this hazard is a potential very large security hole for bigger organizations, right?
And Jordan, I think, had suggested making this really, I remember now, like making really hard to run into this if we like design it right. Is that accurate from your feedback last week, I think?
That's what I recall. I'm still a little fuzzy on last week, but
well, I mean,
that seems right.
Yeah, like if it's a security hazard and our goal is to give users a way to do this, but make it like only for experts and you have to jump through a whole bunch of hoops, like, well, I have a great way for us to make it really hard for anybody to do it, which is the current status quo. You have to like specify the the registries you're using at each command. It's like, it's all very, very explicit. I mean, that is actually ideal if that's the goal. If
Well,
there's,
I mean, it would be even like something that I think that had popped in my head last week that would be very simple is, you know, like how we have file and npm and all these custom protocols. If we make some sort of custom protocol like overridable or something, or, you know, whatever, Bike Shed the name, then that would just fail in an npm version that didn't have this feature. And it would then go to the correct registry in an npm version that did have the feature. Like, is something like that possible?
so the hazard there is the hazard that we talked about with adding a new spec, and this is kind of the thing that comes up anytime we talk about adding a new dependency spec.
Mm-hmm.
The cost is that it splits the ecosystem, and it's what we've seen with, you know, it's what we saw with like the hosted package shorthands with the even with adding file was always sort of supported because it's like URL-ish. And so that one was added a long time ago. But yeah, when we do that and you publish something that has that specifier within its dependency sets, now that's a thing that can't be installed by older versions. Now, maybe what we want to say is, well, it's hazardous to install it with older versions. You shouldn't do that. So, you know, the fact that it fails switches from a bug to a feature. We just have to be very, very careful about it. And I mean, we're also seeing that today with like the things that that Yarn added with like pack and workspace. Now there's packages out there that like other package managers can't install without adding those other specifiers.
So, but really quick question. You can't publish today and say this package has to come from this other registry. So actually, I don't think that proposal will fracture the community, because it's not like people are configuring that in a published package anyway. They can't, right? Because you can't control your consumers where they're going to get the other, you know, right? So
you can if you just specify the tarball.
Oh, well, okay.
That's kind of like the current, you know, state of the art workaround for this.
Or a Git repo, I guess, right? But
yep.
Both of those are generally less desirable scenarios. So I guess my point is by adding a new one that is and saying you can't publish if you have this kind of thing was where I was going to go with that, would actually be maybe a reasonable middle ground.
It might be. I mean, one thing that might be a reasonable step in that direction if we were to go with a spec with a new specifier type. And I'm throwing this out there, and I may be the first to trash it, so I'm not like committed to this idea at all. But add a specifier called registry, and so if you do registry : registry URL / package name @ version. The registry protocol would kind of be like, use this registry and then do a, you know, name @ version lookup. And so you could, you know, the kind of the implicit, like essentially just doing a version range would be sort of like a shorthand for registry : registry.npmjs.org / version range or something.
So what were you going to do to trash the idea? Because it sounds like not such a bad idea to me.
It sounds like basically what you're suggesting. So the reason for trashing it is the fact that it would split the community. And so and again, it's not that it necessarily will, it's that that's the hazard. So we just kind of have to be very careful that we don't get ourselves into that situation where there's people depending on it who are going to be upset if we remove it, but the fact that it's out there is causing problems for other users.
So quickly, I just want, based on this RFC though, I think they unfortunately like started off with specifically npm rc config and then ventured into adding something into package JSON, when potentially if we focused on the npm RC configuration, I feel like that's where you probably could introduce a protocol without fragmenting the ecosystem, since it's specific to like configuration that we potentially could support.
Right,
Be
right.
later adopted.
I mean, really, it's just the the security. I haven't, and I have to admit, I have not had a chance to dig into the example hazard that you proposed, that you presented here, Wes. So I'm shooting from the hip a little bit. I apologize.
Totally fine. We could bump this to next meeting too, and to be honest, it really is hard to say that this security hazard should block it. Like at first, I was actually thinking it shouldn't block it, but it is so clearly going to happen that I think it raises the concern. So if I don't know, we could also tool around it in other ways. Like we could, I'm sure there's things we could do as enterprises with hundreds of deployments using everything back to npm3. Like sure, but so like if we can make it not worse for people just to move to npm 7 mostly, then I think we're just doing a good thing. But
yeah, so I think the next step here then is to dig into this specific objection, the specific concern, and decide whether it's a blocker or it's something we can address or it's something that we're just comfortable with. Those are kind of just, that's the exhaustive space of responses we could have. If it's a concern that should be a blocker, then okay, it blocks it and we don't do this. If it's a concern we can address, then we address it. And if we're fine with it, then we just adopt the RFC and have it as a caveat. Like, hey, if you're using this, it's kind of hazardous. Here's the problem.
That's the same if you're defining a third-party registry anyways. Like today, like you could be publishing to the wrong place. Like there's a hazard in that too, like using config.
And this is why
anything.
And this is why I'm concerned, because this is where I say this has happened. I know for a fact it has happened. So making it another way that this can happen is the concern, right? Like
totally. And for publishing, there's publish config. Like you can lock a directory to only ever allow publishing to a registry no matter what else is configured. So that has a safety mechanism, even if it's not safe by default.
I don't think there's a way we can do that for this feature.
Okay. In terms of what we should do here then, like, is this something we just continue to keep bringing up? Like, is there something meaningful that we can do? Like, do we not want to like move forward on this right now?
Maybe let's leave it in the agenda for now. I think
So leave it in the agenda. I will try to fully chew on this security thing and have some more words to say about it, and then we can bring it up next time.
Cool. So moving on then to PR 121, the proposal for adding link and version comment syntax to package version. And I think, Roy, you brought this one back up onto the agenda, right?
Yeah, I was just doing a little bit of house cleanup in the PRs, and I saw this one had no particular label, not much in terms of documentation in the PR itself. So, but I saw it was present in a lot of the previous agendas, so might as well just bring it up. And I think it's a good time because with npm 7 out, we have the support to workspaces. And to me, it feels like a lot of what it's proposing kind of overlaps with what we provide right now with workspaces, right? Workspaces is basically a way of defining things that should just be linked to your node module so that you can consume them. So I don't know, thought to bring this up, see if there is any ideas, concerns, but maybe we should give feedback that maybe just use workspaces now. It's just the right way.
and everything I just said about splitting the community by having new specifiers, like 110% applies here. Like this is a great example of that. The use case that's this is targeting, I think, isn't really very well addressed by workspaces though. The idea is I have these kind of I have a package that I'm working on, and I don't want to make my consumer use a specific version of the thing. What I want to do is say, you should be getting some version matching 5.x, but it should be a symlink to your checkout of version 5.x. And I think, honestly, like it's really complicated to make this work, and also to to kind of verify if this is valid or not. And I foresee some challenges if this kind of thing does kind of escape into the public registry. Like it's a weird thing to install a package and have it say, well, you should have a symlink as this dependency. Like it feels I don't know, like it's outside of that dependence scope, right?
Yeah, and the file protocol doesn't solve this at all. Like
well, with the file protocol, with a file protocol, you would be specifying the path that it needs to be symlinked to.
Right.
And in this case, it doesn't want to specify that. It wants to specify a version, but also specify that it should be a symlink.
I feel is pretty complicated.
Yeah, like if I'm giving you the version you want, shut up. Just take it. Do your code. And if you need a specific path, well, okay, specify that, and I'll give you that path, or fail. If you want to get repo at a branch, then that's fine too. But like, yeah,
it's like improvements to npm link potentially, which I've seen some discussions brought up, or people poking us because we were hoping to improve npm link in v7. I think as far back as 1.5 to 2 years ago, we were saying that we might improve that experience.
What kind of improvement?
I don't know. Again, I say 1.5 to 2 years ago that those discussions were happening, and
Link was pretty broken in npm 6 in a bunch of cases, which we have since fixed in npm 7, largely by the move to a different package lock system, a tree management module that knows the difference between a link and a target and has them listed as two separate objects. Like the list goes on and on. So there was an old RFC about one possible way to start improving npm link, and we've pretty much abandoned that. We're like, no, we're not just going to stash a whole bunch of extra metadata in a new lock file. Instead, we went a little bit deeper and changed the way that we analyze the file tree and everything else.
Can I don't want to, so I have two things that, not to derail here totally, but I want to bring it back a little bit to this. I actually don't think that they're asking, I think what they're asking for is how to do this with multi repos. And that's the problem with workspaces here, is workspaces are a, like, look here, it even says
really
clone GitHub com cool producer thing and check out this branch. Like, I'm assuming that means they clone, they're trying to tell their consumer, clone this to somewhere next to, I don't think this gives enough details to make a clear assessment of what they're asking for. But like the fact that they want comments to me means they have out of band instructions to give to their user, which I've seen this happen in projects where it's like, check out these 7 repos next to each other. If they're not next to each other, they don't work, right? And like, that's a unfortunate setup, but common. And to me, what they want is what I kind of did my joke, multi-repo workspaces. I really think like this is the ultimate solution here, is let a user, maybe they can't publish it, maybe they can't make it portable, infinitely portable to all other machines, but I want to set up on my machine these 7 packages, and I want them to be able to import each other, and I don't want you to care, you being the tool author or you being my teammate, to care where I put them on my file system. Right. And that's what it's, to me, that's what they're asking for in this in this RFC, is like some way to say, like, I want to be able to get this thing. I want to be able to give some instruction to my maybe teammates on how to get this thing. But like, I don't want to have a hard coded file path in there. Right. Which is what people have today.
Right. So if they all need to be next to each other, you can do that with file : .. /foo, right?
Yeah, totally. If we have that, then we can set up a master repo. I should not use that term. A primary repo that imports them all as submodules, and that's your developer setup, right? And like, fine, that.
But you can already do this with actually with Git submodules. You just add Git submodule update into post install, and then everything just magically works fine. And it actually doesn't matter where the repo lives on. Like, the repo doesn't have to live on your file system.
Okay. Maybe I haven't seen your exact setup here, and maybe is this derailing this conversation?
No, I think it's re-railing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you maybe describe that a little bit more then?
So if in the comment from the RFC, it looks like he's saying, I want this other dep there too, on that right branch. So if instead you use Git submodules, you can make a folder inside your repo that transparently points to a folder on a repo at a SHA somewhere else. So, and then as long as the person who's cloning your repo remembers to run Git submodule update, then which is one of the big ergonomic issues with it, but you can stick it in post install so that it just happens automatically when you run npm install.
And then they can.
Then when that happens, that reifies that folder as if it's a symlink to the repo. And then when you cd into that and make changes, you can git commit them to the submodule and push them up to the submodule, and then cd back out, and you're in the main repo. And so you don't actually need a copy of the inner repo somewhere else. It's just like a symlink across repos, and Git has supported that for a long time. It's just like, it's a pretty gnarly feature if you don't abstract away as much as you can. So people tend not to dive into it, but in these basic ways we're talking about, you can do it. So I'm actually using this, I started using this a week ago because I have a package called list exports that has like a buttload of fixtures, like example projects, and I didn't want to have to repeat that data. And so I made that a submodule in a not yet landed PR on Resolve, so that I have a bunch of fixtures to test resolution against. And it's pretty automatic. Like you'd have to try pretty hard to not have the right thing happen in the Resolve repo once that lands.
I will definitely try this out. That said, I have tried to do submodules with a team of more than one person, and it has always been a pain. So maybe
fair.
There's trade-offs. The reason I really strongly think that support in the package installer layer for this sort of repo agnostic feature, right, is that there are tons of different setups, and lots of times they're not like intentional. They can be organic setups where then suddenly somebody has to come in and work with a bunch of packages together that they maybe don't always have to work in. When you're debugging something in a transitive 4 layers down, like sometimes you don't have you're not going to go set up like a intermediary project that pulls it all in as submodules and whatever. You just want like an ad hoc, hey, I want to check this out over here because I'm positive the bug's in this 3-level down transitive, but I actually want to link every layer because I have to like pass down a config, right? And like when you're in that scenario, you don't have any tooling today to do that, right? You need to go and do this manual setup, and it's painstaking, and also then every single npm command just undoes all your work. So like you have to go in and like link them regularly and all sorts of stuff. Whereas if you had a feature that supported multi-repo workspace, all of this would just sort of go away, and you just be able to say, I'm in a workspace now.
I think we're talking about two different things. Like the problem in the RFC is talking about not because it's an npm dependency, but because I have magic stuff hard coded in my app. I need another Git repo located in a specific location on the machine. I don't think I think that's something Git submodules can solve. And I also don't think that's something NPM should encourage or make easier. The use case you're talking about, Wes, is one that I am super on board with, which is, so like, for example, I have Enzyme, and that has an enzyme adapter and like 3 internal packages that are all in the Enzyme monorepo and React. And if I want to test Enzyme in a different, like a create React app, I have to NPM link like 8 things. And you're right, every NPM install command, I have to redo all those links. It's a huge pain in the ass. So something to solve that problem seems like a really good idea. But that to me feels like something that doesn't require package JSON changes. It requires a command that's smart enough to figure out all the appropriate things to link and link them and preserve those links or quickly restore them so that this actually common developer workflow can be made not a nightmare. But that seems to me to be something different than what this RFC is asking for.
Yeah,
I completely agree. I am fully on board. I think what they want is not what they asked for, and I think what they want is what you're describing, and what they asked for is specific package JSON changes.
Yeah. And if they want what you and I are describing, then I think that is definitely something we should provide people. Like I'm doing this thing where I'm like mentoring like bootcamp fellows in a program or whatever, and they're like having to explain how to link Enzyme into a Create React App project is a very long and arduous process because it is hard and it is confusing and I barely understand it. So like writing, like I think solving that problem is not just much more important than what this RFC appears to be asking for, but also like may in fact, as you said, solve the underlying problem that this person really actually needs solved.
Yeah. I wanted to kind of add, I think we stumbled upon the exact same conclusion in a different RFC before. Maybe it was Christian. Anyways, it was a different one proposing, I think, a protocol or new protocol or something. And yeah, I think like this one I could definitely see something like maybe an NPM eject and a specifier for that kind of takes it out of your node modules, put it as a workspace in your top level, allows you to hack it, and now it's a workspace. You can do whatever, right? Like maybe it can be just a command and solve much more elegantly like the problem they're trying to solve.
That's a really interesting proposal. So I think if you had NPM effectively grab the repository and pull it in, it might work. It does mean though that if you are, so most of the time for me, I have these things all set up on my local. So again, like going back to, okay, so today I was trying to push that stupid create package for the pkg.js org. And like I was realizing that I had changes in 4 repos that all had to go before I could push the code and have it actually work for somebody else. And I kept on finding little bugs and changing little things and going back and forth. And I ended up running npm link like probably 40 times in the span of an hour because I was like, you know, fixing something, publishing one, but then linking it anyway. And it was a real big pain. And I think that having a command that checked out the repo would actually have been also bad because I would have now had 4 copies of each of the modules in their separate things, right? Which is where I go back to, I really think we need to say, NPM, here is where you can find this package for now. Like I already have it, or maybe, and here could be a Git repository or a Semver version, and it would like pull the registry and check out the proper tag or do something smart. But like it needs to have some level of no network access, you know, like here's where it exists on my file system already for it to be useful for, I think, most of my scenarios.
So just to be mindful of time, we only have about 4 minutes left, and I know we have one more item to get to. Are we good with time boxing this and potentially, I guess, try and give feedback in the thread itself? There really hasn't been any comments other than you poking in there, right?
Yeah, no, I can definitely leave some feedback there with regards to maybe potentially trying to steer into a subcommand or something.
Yeah, it seems like as it is now, it's probably not something that we want to support based on the initial feedback of not like trying to introduce like something that would fragment like on more protocols, right? So, okay. The last item on the agenda was deprecated packages should be, this is RFC 155. So deprecating packages should automatically display the dependents to ease notifying maintainers. And I think when this was first brought up, I think, Isaac, you just said this is a good idea.
Yeah, I do. I think it's, so I think it may be a little bit more challenging than I originally thought, just because, you know, having done more of these installs, especially seeing like the typical Gatsby install right now that has like 30 deprecated modules or something, thanks to the lab switching over and a couple of other kind of key ones. The hazard I would want to avoid is dumping, you know, thousands of lines of output onto the user's terminal. So it may be worthwhile to just like, if there are any deprecated modules, you know, output like a, you should run npm explain blah that will tell you what's using it.
So that's something we could support today. Like if we see npm install, we could, or if we see deprecations from npm install, then we can also add the run explore to determine what actually you'd have to fix to,
yeah,
run, not explore, but explain. Sorry.
Explain, yeah. I wouldn't want to run the explain for them automatically, just because it is rather verbose. I mean, it gives you the full explanation of like, why is popper in your tree, which if popper is used by 3 different things, which all are, you know, peer dependencies of Gatsby, it's gonna be rather elaborate. So, and it's not something that you can actually fix as the user right away. The most that you can usually do is go and post an issue saying, hey, you're depending on a deprecated version of this thing. So if we're too aggressive with like the amount of bits that we spit out onto the user's screen, it just becomes even more noisy. But if we give them at least
consolidating, like you wouldn't do what's proposed here, but in npm explain potentially you could, at least for deprecated, like I guess you're right.
We could also gather up all of the deprecate. You know, we could add like add a way to say like, just give me an explanation of everything that's deprecated in my tree, and consolidate these things when you have, you know, 50 different
like npm fund
notices.
And it's just the number of deps, and then you would actually check the explain txt.
Yeah, or we could just say like there are 12 deprecated modules. Run npm explain -- deprecated to show all of them. And then that would actually give you like a nice working list of like what is depending and what's pulling in the deprecated versions.
So we would change actually install output then?
Yeah, it would change the install output because we would basically remove those warnings and instead, kind of consolidate them up.
I feel like that's useful. I'm not sure how other people feel.
It's a different RFC though, for sure.
Yeah, but definitely sounds like an improvement, yeah.
Well, because this is just like a RFC, like we could potentially propose something on behalf of this person to address this. Okay. Something we want to take away, or one of us can action item? Creating an RFC for essentially consolidating deprecated warnings, and then suggesting npm explain with a flag, or adding npm explain to support a flag like deprecated. Is that kind of the idea? Okay, let's just take some notes on that. And I don't think there's anything else to follow up there, unless somebody else had something they want to add, because I know we're over time. Okay. Great. So I appreciate everybody jumping on again. I apologize for going a couple minutes over. And feel free to keep adding your feedback and RFCs to the NPM RFCs repo. I'll see you next week.
Have
Ciao.
fun.
Next week.
Thanks all.
Thank you.